My name is Justin, and I am an addict and the host of the RECO12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I'm living the relative happy, joyous, and free life that is promised to those living in recovery and have been very active in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013. Welcome to the 122nd meeting of RECO12. We are an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and the similarities of recovery from all afflictions and addictions, and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are trudging this road. We are an open meeting for all, no matter your life experiences, faith traditions, nationality, or background. To learn more about RECO12, please go to www.reco12.com. That's RECO12.com. We are a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our 12th step in this manner. I'll put the information and links in the chat of the live meeting for you to donate if you choose to, and also in the show notes of the podcast if you wish to contribute to this cause. If RECO12 is a meaningful tool for you and your recovery walk, please consider rating and reviewing us in the podcast platform of your using. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers from their higher power. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. I'm excited to hear from this week's guest, Cameron F., who is now a 4-time veteran of RECO12. If you want to hear his other talks on RECO12, he did meetings number 2, number 69, and number 94. And you can find those anywhere you listen to podcasts. His topic today will be placing principle before personalities. And here's a little bit about him before I give the floor to him. Cameron F. has been a member of Cocaine Anonymous since November 21st, 2003. As a Big Book sponsor, he has worked with all kinds of addicts from around the world. He facilitates a 12-step in 4 hours workshop, and that link will be in the show notes here and in the chat, the fourth Sunday of every month, and has carried the 12-step message of recovery to well over 5,000 suffering addicts over the years. His recovery message is, quote, "It only takes a few hours to learn the 12 steps program and the rest of your life to practice it." Cameron does service at all levels of the fellowship and is currently the archivist for Cocaine Anonymous worldwide. In short, Cameron has what I want. Take it away, Cameron. The floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Justin. And just a brief correction. It's the last Sunday of every month because some months do have 5 Sundays in them. So it's always the last Sunday of the month that we do the workshop. So welcome, everybody. My name's Cameron. I am a member of a 12-step fellowship. I'm a member of a number of different fellowships. My primary fellowship is Cocaine Anonymous, where I identify as a drug addict, alcoholic, although I have been a member of AA and have spoken throughout AA. I've even spoken in NA, although I have to be more mindful of my narratives in that particular fellowship. Also SLAW, where I identify as a codependent, and CODA. I was extraordinarily codependent in my early life, and the behavior patterns of people pleasing and murdering and bullying and all that sort of stuff, with the battle cry being, I need you to change how you think, feel, and behave towards me in order for me to feel okay. And that battle cry even occurs today in the fellowship. But before I get into principles before personality, the theme of today's topic, I just want to qualify so you just don't think I'm some kind of bored individual that happened across Justin's podcast and decided because I'm lonely I need to chat to somebody. So to briefly qualify what it was like, what happened, and what I'm like today. As an alcoholic addict, I love drinking. I love using. It was my solution to everything that ailed me because, generally my baseline attitude untreated is restless, irritable, discontented, bored, depressed, anxious, and I don't like feeling that way. And so my solution is to drink and use. And sometimes, depending on the pattern, I can act out too to get relief from that disposition. And in the beginning, it seemed like the answer, right? It was like, wow, yeah, this is exactly the way I want to feel. And I want to be this way 24/7. And what started off as fun, it was all fun in the beginning, but then it became fun with problems. Then it became nothing but problems. And the nature of our illness is progressive. And, it went from being a luxury to a necessity in my life where I needed to be altered all the time. My normal life is to be high. And if I'm not high, that it creates that restless, irritable disposition. And I don't like that. So towards the end of it, though, there were so many problems, so much internal unmanageability. I couldn't even manage the restless, irritable disposition, even with drugs and alcohol. It wasn't working anymore. And then the external unmanageability, the carnage that went with drinking and using with my family and career and my health. And it was just awful. And I came to that point where I really wanted to stop. I truly wanted to stop. And when I tried to stop, I found I couldn't stay stopped. Somehow, some way, I kept returning to the very substances that was destroying my life. I usually equate that twist of thinking, that mental blank spot in my brain, as a liar that fails to hold me in check. It parallels my sound reasoning, but it fails to hold me in check. And this liar loves the effect produced by these behaviors, this drinking, using, acting out, and it doesn't want to give it up. So it built this research institute in my brain called Bullshit Inc. And it's got thousands of technicians employed where they're researching new ideas, new excuses, new reasons why I should drink and use again. And they're really compelling reasons. And the problem is, even when I don't want to, the liar always wins the argument. And that's a real problem. I can't seem to defeat the liar. I have no defense against the liar. And as much as I like to tell you I'm just going to go to the pub and have a pint, maybe a couple of shots of bourbon and come home, I really can't predict what it's going to look like once I start. It could last a night, could go on for a day, a week, a month, a year or more. I have no idea. And then I emerge from that spree and I'm full of horror and remorse and hopelessness. And I make a firm resolution, a resolution that registers very truthful on a lie detector test. But I don't know how to live without it. I know I can't live with it, but I don't know how to live without it. And so I go into the rooms and I'm seeking a solution. And in the beginning, I went to a lot of meetings that didn't have a solution. They just, sit in a seat, wait for the miracle to happen. This program's caught, not taught. And, all those bromides, those unworkable bromides we hear in the rooms. And I went into sobriety. And I started drying out and I got restless and irritable and discontented. And then the liar came out of remission and said, hey, we need our solution. And of course, I have no defense. I succumbed to the desire, and out I went again, and round and round and round on that wheel of misfortune, pursuing my love of drinking and using to the gates of insanity or death. And we all know people that have died. If you got it, this illness is a death sentence, because nothing I do, nothing secular, nothing human is going to stop me from picking up that next drink or drug. And for me to pick up a drink or drug is to get onto a trajectory to the gates of insanity or death. And that's the die, and that's a horrifying conclusion. One other thing I'll say about the rooms when they don't have a solution, because there is a solution, which is our 12-step program of recovery.
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
When I don't have a solution, I'm sitting there in sobriety. I don't want to go out, and I don't go out, or I know people that don't go out. And what they do is they literally go insane. And they end up committing suicide. I've buried 42 people that I've worked with directly over the years, mostly to alcohol death. 9 of them took their own lives, hung themselves in sobriety. Why would someone hang themselves in sobriety? Because they couldn't and wouldn't work our program. They wouldn't plug into the notion of a higher power capable of restoring them to sanity. And they went insane and took their own lives. And the suicide rates in the rooms at 12 Steps today is approximately 80 times higher than normal society. You are 80 times more likely to take your own life in sobriety in the first 5 years of untreated addiction. So it's imperative that we carry the good news, that there is a solution in our room. And because I met someone who was armed with the facts about themselves, they knew what it was like to live in that hole I was in. More importantly, they had a solution, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a generosity of spirit, and they showed me a way out of that predicament. And they introduced me to the 12-step program. And we didn't go to a meeting. We went to a coffee shop and opened up our books, and one alcoholic, one addict working with another, we went through the process. Now, I mentioned this, and one last thing about what my life is like today. I'm an alcoholic addict who doesn't drink or use, a paradox of our program, because everything in my experience tells me I will drink and use again, yet I don't. And that's the miracle of this program, because I've plugged into a power deep down within me. And that's another paradox. Where do we find this power? Deep down within ourselves. And it's greater than the booze, greater than the drugs, greater than the acting out addiction. It's real dope. It's a real power I connect and wield in my life. And I've done more in the last 18 and a half years of my life than I did in the first 46, because I drank and used pretty much morning, noon, and night from the age of 20 to 46. So I got taken through this process. Now, I got taken through a process he was a big book guy, very staunch, advocate of the big book. They were known as muckers here in Toronto, and they would muck up their books, right? They'd circle words and make notes, and they would make a mess of their big books as they delved into the text. And they were called muckers, and they were a lot of them got very self-righteous, and they were very adamant that all they needed was a big book and a newcomer. Sometimes I'll crack off, when someone called me, "Oh, Cameron, I'm having a hard time. I don't know. I think I might drink." I go, "Look, take 2 big books, 1 newcomer, call me in the morning," which is the foundation of our program, one addict working with another. And that's our first legacy of our fellowship, of our wonderful program called Recovery, Steps 1 to 12. Now, the muckers, they hated the fellowship. They did not like the fellowship. There was a lot of animosity in fellowship, because in the fellowship, there was a lot of meeting makers, make it mentality, a lot of counseling, a lot of treatment. Not that these things are necessarily bad, but in my experience, they don't work for me. And these are the bromides. I'd see these unworkable, untenable bromides being kicked around the rooms, which spawned actually an article. I forget who wrote it, but it was called "That Ain't in the Big Book." That ain't in the big book, like this program's caught, not taught, or sit in the seat and wait for the miracle to happen sort of stuff. So they had a lot of animosity. And what happened is, over the years, as I witnessed the trajectory of the muckers as a kind of a sect of 12 steps, is a lot of them are dead. A lot of them died alone. Yes, the foundation stone of our program is one addict working with another. But once we start to commence that work, it starts to grow. And then, 2 of us that have recovered, now we find 2 more. Now there's 4 of us. And then we go out. Now there's 8 and 16. And, now there's literally millions across the world involved in some 300 different 12-step fellowship. So it becomes very apparent that we need a group. A group forms, a group of addicts or alcoholics or people suffering from an addiction pattern. And that brings our second legacy of the program into action, which is our fellowship, the unity of our fellowship. And that is facilitated through our 12 traditions, whereby the 12 steps is a recipe for recovery. The 12 traditions is a recipe for unity, because it becomes very apparent that unless we hang together, we will die alone. And I've seen that happen many times with addicts who develop an animosity to the fellowship. And I get it. I get that animosity myself, working day in and day out with some pretty, horrendous people. Some of them are even dangerous. And I can understand how that animosity come about, which is the subject of today's talk, which is personalities, principles before personality. See, there's the faux pas. I want to make personalities ahead of principles. And of course, so we have the principles of our recovery program, the 12 steps, the principles of our traditions, and then we have this amazing opportunity to actualize those principles in the service structure of our particular fellowship, where it be at the group level or the district level or an area level or a world level. We have an opportunity of an environment to demonstrate and embody and apply these principles of recovery, where we carry the message the addict still suffers, and the principles of our traditions, where we come together in a unified fellowship, bound together by our common solution, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we become this fellowship. And it's an amazing fellowship to be a part of it. And as tradition 1 says, the common welfare of the group must come first. Individual welfare is a close second. And, and unless we hang together, we will die alone. So, our second legacy, the unity of our fellowship, is extremely important. So in my application of these principles, traditions, and the 12 steps, I'm interacting with a lot of people, recovered and unrecovered, within the service structure of the group, district, area, or world level. And I run into a lot of personalities. Now that brings in tradition 12. That we must place, anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personality. Now, I think, and I hear people go, oh, you're breaking traditions. Oh, that's a tradition violation. Well, I think tradition 12 is the most commonly broken tradition there is out there. I break that tradition at least a dozen times a day. Working within the fellowship is yeast for my bread. Like, I'm up close and personal with a lot of intense people. And often a personality will take precedent over the principle. Now, when I'm centered, when I'm using the tools of my program and I'm using prayer to communicate with the divine reality deep down within myself, and I'm using meditation to discern what answers to get, and I center my being, generally I can apply those traditions in my affairs of the fellowship. But when I'm uncentered, and I do get off-centered, I'm constantly trying to correct my course throughout the day, I get reactive and I get sensitive. Most addicts are very sensitive people, and it takes a long time to overcome this handicap. That's on, I think, page 125 of our big book. Alcoholics are very sensitive people, and I'm sensitive. I can react to a lot of things when I'm uncentered. And then I put personality ahead of the principle, and the shit show starts. So how can I get back to my center? How can I make the common welfare of the group the primary importance for the, so that I will, I can live together rather than die alone? And that brings in step 4 and 5. Our program, our 12-step program, is a design for living without our addiction pattern in it, whether it be booze, drugs, or an acting out addiction. I have a design for living that really works. And, regardless of what I face in the day, there's some tool that's been laid at my feet by the man who took me through the program that I can implement when I'm encountering challenges. Like when the world isn't going my way, that's a step 3 problem. I'm no longer in the Cameron business. I'm in the God business, right? He's the principal, I'm the agent. So it's a step 3, application. If I have a hard time communicating with that divine reality, or I feel blocked, I have the disciplines of prayer and meditation, where I can communicate with the divine and meditate and discern answers as to what my course of action should be throughout the day. If I'm being overtly selfish or entirely focused on Cameron and my little plans, my little designs, I have the discipline of step 12, working unselfishly with other addicts and to smash that selfishness. And when I have resentments, when I place a personality ahead of a principle, I get resentful. I don't like this person. And that really exacerbates my codependence, because they're thinking, feeling, and behaving towards me in a way that I don't like. And unless they change how they think and feel, behave towards me, I can't be happy. And so all this awful behavior comes out. I become bullying. I say pejorative, misogynistic, or bigoted things. I gossip and slander. Like, I got hateful, immoral thinking and vulgar language that goes with it. It's just awful when I do that. Now, the great thing about the program is I'm highly aware when I venture into that fourth column and I'm acting out of my defects. And through years and years of doing column work from step 4 and 5, where I rub my nose in my own shit, where I rub my nose in my own moral defects, I really see the gravity of what that lifestyle leads to. I see the futility and the fatality and the destructiveness of it. And most of all, when I'm caught up in those blocks, those impediments to the spiritual reality, I suffer its symptoms. When I'm in hatred or moral thinking or vulgar language or gossip or slander or misogyny or bigotry or rudeness or misanthropic attitudes towards humankind, or the Germans call it Schadenfreude, the English version is called epicaricacy, taking great pleasure in other people's misfortune. It seems like there's a lot of that around the world today. And when I'm caught up in those, I suffer its symptoms. I get restless. I get irritable. I get discontented and bored and depressed. And then the liar comes out of remission and says, "Hey, Cameron, screw this. We need our solution. Let's go have a bourbon." And nothing good is going to come from succumbing to that desire. So when personalities do threaten me and do supersede the principle of the program, where the common welfare of our fellowship comes first, and we got to hang together, I use step 4 and 5 a lot, because I realize when personalities are in play, my defects are in play. And so I do an inventory. Now, if you've not done a step 4 or 5 process, there's a lot of misinformation about step 4 and 5. And I want to just demystify that process a little bit and why it's so important that we do it on a regular basis. Enjoyment is not the word for it, but I do my inventory regularly, because I need to stay conscious. I need to stay cognitive of where I'm at. Right? I need to know that if I want to get somewhere, I got to know where I'm at. And so I do the inventory, and I look at, my resentments. I look at the harms I've done to other people, and I look at my fears that are driving all of this. And inventory brings that to the surface. It's a fact-finding, truth-facing endeavor. Now, remember, step 4 is a fearless and searching moral inventory. We're doing a moral inventory. This is not a secular or psychological approach. We have applications for that, and I'm by no means, against therapy or counseling, because there is an application for those disciplines. In the context of 12-step, though, we do a moral inventory. 12 steps is a spiritual moral approach to the efficacy of addiction. So I look at these character defects, as I learned in step 3, selfishness, self-centeredness, that's the root of my trouble. My troubles are basically of my own making. They arise out of myself. And I look at this overt sense of selfish and self-centeredness in the context of a resentment, fear, or harm. And I look at what's my part. This is what I love about 12 steps. It never says what's your part. It always says what's my part in this, because I can't change you. Because if I start trying to change you, I get into that codependent behavior. And those of you on the channel that may be involved with Al-Anon or CODA or ACA, you have a good idea of how detrimental it is to act out in a codependent way. I play the victim. I'm reactive. I can't be happier. And, it's just an awful way to live. And I lived that way a long time in my life, trying to change others, how they thought and behaved and felt towards me. So I look at these resentments, harms, and fears, and I start teasing out a moral inventory, and it begins to reveal a pattern in my life. Now, when it comes to step 5, the confession of these moral defects, what I'm confessing are the defects. Now, a lot of people seem to think of step 4 and 5, and a lot of people go out on step 4 and 5 because there's so much fear around it, and they don't really want to look at themselves that closely. And so they go out. Now, I do 2 things. If I'm working with someone who's really sketchy, someone who's having a hard time maybe really in an unstable way, I'll do the step 4 and 5 with them right there after we do the step 3 prayer. And we'll do it together, arm in arm. Let's face it together. You don't have to face it alone. And I'll ask them about one of their big resentments. I like the big resentments first. When you think of somebody, you want to chop them up, wrap them up in butcher paper and put them in the freezer. That's a good person to put on your resentment list. If I think of someone and I wince with guilt and shame and I go, oh my God, how could I have done that? That's a good person to put on a harms inventory. And out of those 2 areas of my life, I can tease out the fear. What am I so afraid of that drives all these awful behaviors? So you do an inventory, and I found a really interesting pattern emerge in my life. And, at the beginning of my journey back in 2003, these character defects were really strong and really in play and created a lot of problems in my life. And I'll do my step 4 and 5 with all of you right now, just to show you how simple it is, where I don't have to incriminate myself or share embarrassing things that can be leveraged against me, because that's not really what a step 4 and 5 is about. You know what they are. You know what the circumstance or what it was, but what we're trying to figure out is the moral defect behind it. So I could just tell you I'm dishonest, selfish, self-centered, and frightened. And that's 4 big character defects, but I find that not specific enough. I want to get down to root causes and conditions. So I delve deeper into it. Now I suffer out of my selfish, self-centered ways. I suffer false pride. And my false pride goes to arrogance. Others, it might go to self-loathing, self-deprecation, but mine's arrogance. And out of that arrogance can come bigotry and misogyny and rudeness. I just dismiss entire groups of people in my arrogance. I get very distrustful and suspicious. I get very self-seeking. My self-seeking motives is to be validated by others, to be recognized, to be approved by others, to be the center of attention. And then I get dishonest and I lie and I exaggerate and I'm intolerant and I'm inconsiderate and I'm lustful and I'm hateful and I procrastinate and I'm impatient and I get very irresponsible. I blame others. I enable others. I martyr myself. I get into vulgar talk, immoral thinking. I gossip. I slander. I'm sarcastic. I'm cynical. I take pleasure in other people's misfortune. I loathe my own species. I loathe it so much sometimes I just wish an asteroid would blast into planet Earth, kill everybody. I don't even mind dying knowing you're coming with me. That's misanthropy. It's a terrible thing to have. I'm indiscreet. I got prejudices and unfair biases. And that was my inventory. And you know what was interesting? Those same moral defects came up again and again and again in all my resentments and all my harms to other people. And I'll never forget the guy who was taking me through the steps, my sponsor, I guess you would call him. He says, you see that list, Cameron? He says, that's your resume. That's your resume as an untreated addict. Next time you go for a job interview or you want to have a relationship with somebody, you show them that list because that's who they're getting. And I found that really objectionable. Like I looked at that in black and white and I thought, this is a very fact-finding, truth-facing, really distasteful observation of myself. And I didn't want to be that way. Now, the great thing about step 4 and 5 is not only do we uncover the specific defects and confess them in the presence of another human being and God itself, is that I realize how futile and fatal and destructive they are. There's no power there for me, right? They block me from God. But they also reveal where the power is. And what I do is I flip those moral defects into a spiritual principle. So instead of false pride, it's humility. Instead of bigotry, misogyny, or rudeness, it's respectfulness, courtesy, politeness, and down through the list I go, instead of self-seeking validation, approval, center of attention, all I do is give it away. I make others the center of my attention. I approve of others. I validate others. The interesting thing happened as God says, Cameron, go do this. That's what you should do. You get to keep it by giving it away. So give it away. And then out of left field, God takes care of me. And I got this reputation that precedes me around the world. And I never intended to do anything, but just try and be helpful to the addict that suffers. And now, it's like there's thousands of people that I communicate with. They come to the workshop. They use the workbook. I get lots of accolades. And oh my God, it really is quite incredible living as God's agent out there doing his work and not mine. And so I have this track to run on now. Now, here's another paradox, because the spiritual principles becomes God's description for my day: to be intimate and active and prompt, to have faith and courage, to be responsible, to be independent, interdependent, to have levity, wisdom, empathy, compassion, devotion to humanity, discretion, fairness, justice, etc. And so now I got a track to run on. And here's the paradox of step 4 and 5. God hires people with the worst resumes to do his work. Like, it's just really amazing. And so in staying, aware of being cognitive of my character defects on a day-by-day basis and constantly correcting my course from column 4, the defects, into column 5, what should I do instead? How can I set matters straight and do God's will? I begin, and then using 6 and 7, this intervention of the divine in my life to give me the willingness to let go of these character defects. And I still to this day will argue for a character defect. And God always says, congratulations, Cameron, you get to keep it. And the paycheck that goes with that. But I've noticed over the years, and this is where I suppose the incremental spiritual progress occurs, I start to see where the bigotry and the misogyny and the arrogance and the self-centeredness and the rudeness, it's dissipating. It's not as prevalent as it used to be. And I'm a lot quicker at recognizing. A lot of my inventory now is stuff I do in my head, the thoughts I have in my head. It's not getting to my mouth, nor getting into an actual behavior or a harm. So this is where I've noticed spiritual progress. And this is really the essence of 4 and 5, is this confession of moral defects in the presence of God and another human being. And it's just the moral defect. When I hear a step 5, I just need to know you understand what it means to be selfish and arrogant and self-loathing, and how that can play out in your life in a general way. I don't need to know the specifics, right? And a lot of people think it's all about junky pride and sharing how bad you were and how what awful things you've done. And then in some cases, I don't want to hear that, because then it become a garbage can, right? That's not really what I believe a step 5 is all about. And so in this process of doing that, I correct my course. I get back on purpose with God's description, and my animosities towards people dissipate. And I can truly, in being centered with the divine consciousness, being centered on doing God's will in all my affairs of the day, I can literally put principle ahead of personality, even when I, can, focus on some animosity, but I can suspend that and actually put the principle and the common good and the welfare of the fellowship ahead of that. And so I'm able to hang together and be an amazing part of this wonderful fellowship we call 12 steps. And by hanging together, I grow, I learn. Because a minimum unit of fellowship at 2, and it often takes 2 to see 1. So I rely on people. My good friend Nikki, I think, who's on the channel, runs with the Spiritual Gangster. She'll point out my defects. She's quite clear at pointing out my defects, and sometimes because they're a blind spot for me. And that's the great thing about the fellowship. And I'll say one last thing as we close off here, Justin. I love hanging in the fellowship, because when I'm with the muggles, the non-addicts, the non-wizards in Harry Potter terms, the muggles, I can't have the conversations with that group of people that I can have with addicts. Like addicts, man, we got a richness and a tapestry of a broad living experience. And so almost anything can be brought into the fellowship and discussed and looked at. And it really is an amazing thing to be a part of. And I love the fellowship. I love the principles of our 12 traditions, and using those 12 traditions and those principles of our 12-step recovery and actualizing them at the group, the district, the area, or the world level, and to see how your message is leveraged out across those mediums. And that's an experience you don't want to miss. And I know you don't want to miss it. So come join us. And that's my take on Tradition 12 and Steps 4 and 5. Thanks, Justin. Thank
you, Cameron. And I love that idea that you threw out there, that God hires the people with the worst resumes to do his work. How grateful I am for that, because man, what a mess my resume is. But thank you so much for this, Cameron. We have several questions that have come in from the live audience, as well as ones that I've written. And a reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Cameron, type it in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other. We'll get to as many of those as we can during this next 20 minutes or so. Okay, first question comes from an anonymous attendee. They ask, what do you recommend saying or doing when you have a sponsee who blatantly does not want to sponsor when they finish the steps? This person needs some experience, strength, and hope on this. What's your take on that, Cameron?
Well, if I'm putting principle ahead of or a personality ahead of principle, I'd say you selfish prick. You need to smoke more crack. But I just, it's like the way God deals with me. God is so indifferent. I go, God, I want to do it this way. I just want to turn this person's head into a canoe. And God simply says, well, Cameron, you're welcome to do it your way. And there's a paycheck for doing it your way. However, if you want to do it my way, there's a paycheck for that too. So you get to decide, right? And ultimately, God wins the argument, because when I do it my way, I generally end up being selfish and self-seeking and full of fear, and then I get restless, irritable, discontented, bored, and depressed, and that's miserable. And I'll either go insane or I'll end up succumbing to the desire, and the real carnage of my life will ensue. So I really don't get caught up in it. I don't try and micromanage, because I think that's codependent too. Where I try to, like you see it with sponsors. I find some sponsors really codependent. I'm going to love you till you love yourself, or shut the fuck up, take the cotton out of your ears and shove it in your mouth. You're going to do whatever I tell you to do, or I'm going to fire your ass. As if those strategies work. That's just more codependent. So I'm very indifferent. Hey, all I can do is carry the message to you. If you want to do it, great. I'll do whatever I can to support you in that. You don't want to do it? Hey, that's your business. Good luck with that.
Yeah, and that's what my sponsor told me when I finished up the 12 steps. He said, all right, time to sponsor. And I hemmed and hawed at, and he goes, well, congratulations. You just worked an 11-step program. Good luck staying sober. I wish you the best. And me being the people pleaser and the proud SOB I am, I was like, I'll show you. I'm going to go sponsor, So that's what I needed, was somebody to say, I don't care. You do what you will. But that's how it worked with me when I hesitated there too. Thanks for sharing that. All right. Next question comes from Ethan. There's 2 questions here from Ethan. Ethan says, how often do you do a step 4? And what are your thoughts on doing a step 4 as part of a daily step 10 inventory? How do you differentiate those?
Oh, it's a good question. My initial step 4 is an inventory of that point in my first, as I'm starting the program of recovery. And so I do an inventory on all my past resentments, fears, and harms. Once I've done that, if I've been thorough, now if I haven't been thorough, I can always revisit those things from the past. And occasionally things do pop up from my past that I need to take a look at and inventory. But now at this point in my program, that's really part of my step 10 discipline. Step 10 is really step 4 on a daily basis. Now, when it comes to my inventory, I have 3 levels that I approach my inventory. Sometimes an awful thought will enter my brain, and I'll start thinking about that, and I'll get into the character defects, and I go, oh, Cameron, come on, like, let it go. And I brush it off, and that's it. I don't think about it anymore in the day. I don't deal with it later on in the day when I review my day. I just brushed it off in the moment. Now, sometimes things will come up, and I can't seem to brush it off. It's really wearing on me. I'm starting to obsess about it a little. I'm running scenarios in my brain, and it's vulgar or immoral. And in that case, then a little more effort is needed. A little more, program is needed to be applied. So I'll pause, and I'll pray, and I'll meditate. And usually that will do the trick. So that's kind of a second level approach to my daily inventory. And sometimes it gets right under my skin, like the other day, and I let it rip. And it comes out of my mouth, and it hits another person. And now I've done damage to myself and to others. And now I'm drawing columns. And now I'm scraping like barnacles off the hull my moral inventory. And I'm looking very closely at what the heck am I doing and how futile, fatal, and destructive it is. And I'm on the phone and I'm sharing it with somebody and I'm eating my humble pie because I got to clean up the mess. And believe me, eating humble pie is an awful experience. It tastes awful. And the longer it sits, the worse it tastes. So, and I draw columns. And those are kind of the three levels that I approach my step 10 daily inventory. But the initial step 4 is all about the past. And step 10 is really the inventory of today. So I keep my day and I keep my being centered and on track. So I'm not piling stuff up that accumulates as past inventory. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cameron. I have a question regarding dead groups where the solution is not being shared. Sometimes I'll go into a group, a fellowship meeting, and it's a glorified, I don't know, share where it's like, hey, I had a rough week this week, but I have hope that if I just try harder and do better, I'll be better. And then they pass. How and I try and share my experience, strength, and hope. But what do you do in those types of meetings to try and ignite a fire in those things?
Yeah, I was in a meeting like that last night. I was speaking in Scotland, and some of them are really like when I present, I try to be enthusiastic. I'm passionate. I'm excited. I think there's only one thing more contagious than enthusiasm, and that's a lack of it. So I try to be a cheerleader for the solution. Sometimes I'll go into one of those really dry meetings where, they're so dry, if you lit a match, the place would go up like a bonfire. And, sometimes I have fun, especially on one of those old meetings. I remember speaking at a group. It was called the Fifth Tradition Group. This group hadn't seen a newcomer in 20 years, just a lot of white hairs, commiserating about their day. And they're going, I'm an alcoholic, and they're going around the room. And I go, hi, my name's Cameron. I'm an intelligent agent, a spearhead of ever advancing creation. It really is great to be here. I love the big book. I love the solution. I found a whole new way of living, and I try to inject some enthusiasm. Sometimes it just doesn't go over, but that's okay. I have a lot of fun doing it. And occasionally someone will come up and say, I don't know what you got, Cameron, but I really love it. And, can you tell me more? And you can start to change things. Sometimes, you do take flack. Some people don't want to be in this program. They're just stuck in their ways, and they want to do group therapy without a therapist and all that sort of stuff. And that's okay. You do what you got to do, but when I carry a message, ultimately there's always one in the room that goes, man, I'm dying here and I ain't feeling better. I was talking to a young man last night who's been around the rooms and he just can't take it anymore. And I started sharing with him how I work a program and the excitement and the changes in my life. And he goes, I want what you got. Will you show me how to get it? Sure, I'll show you how to get it. And we're off on the journey, right?
Yeah, and I think that answers a question maybe of somebody else who said, are you still taking on new sponsees? So what do you say to that, Cameron?
Well, I started working some 18 and a half years ago. I do different ways of, I have 3 messages like today where I do a 40 or a 25-minute share. I do the 12 steps in 4 hours. That's my 4-hour way of carrying the message. And when I work one-on-one with people, I take them through all 12 steps in roughly about 10 days, give or take. And I generally work with 2 people a day. I've done that for almost 18 years. I've carried the message to well over 5,000 people. I'm getting to the point where I just stopped counting. Like it's just, it becomes a little too much. The workshop, we've taken over 5,000 people through it. I've worked one-on-one in the 10-day approach with roughly 400 and some people. And so I'm always working with somebody. I always have somebody on the go, at least one, if not 2. I used to do more than that, but I can't anymore because I'm really busy. I got a lot of things going on, not only in the fellowship, but with my family, and I still do a bit of business and I do a lot of service work as far as the history of our Cocaine Anonymous goes. And I love the history and I love being an archivist, and I'm pretty involved in that. So, but generally 1 or 2 people every day.
Excellent. And I put that 12 steps in 4 hours workshop link there in the chat. It'll be in the show notes for anyone who's interested. That's the last Sunday of each month. So looking forward to that. It's fantastic. All right. Another question from an anonymous attendee. What step do you turn to when you're just hurting, whether it's from active withdrawal or a general spiritual ennui? Wow. Great word.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And I hurt like everybody else. I have feelings of, sadness or sometimes despair or even hopelessness, usually because I'm watching the news. So I try not to indulge. I think of my body like a temple. And how do I keep my temple pure? How do I clean my temple so that I can grow this divine spirit within? So I'm a lot more cognizant of, what foods I feed my body, what drinks I put into my body, what visuals I put into my mind, what I watch on TV, what do I indulge in. I'm more mindful of that. So I keep my temple clean so I can grow that experience. And generally, and using the tools of meditation and prayer. And I get prayer meditation in a lot because when I work with someone, before we start the session, we do a prayer meditation. And when we finish the session, we do a prayer meditation. So I'm getting 2 to 4 meditations a day, which is really helpful. When I'm feeling blue or sad, I feel this way. Now, a lot of feelings are not cognitive tools. Because if you understand the way we work as humans, we think, therefore we feel, therefore we behave, and thus we become. So if I want to change who I am, I change the way I behave. To change the way I behave, I change the way I feel. And to change the way I feel, I've got to look at the way I'm thinking. So what are the thoughts that are driving me? When I'm feeling anxiety and despair and the hopelessness after watching a day of news, my mind, what am I thinking? Well, I'm thinking in fear. I'm thinking there's no control. There's so much authority. There's centralized government. It's becoming oppressive. We're losing land. We're tribalizing. Oh my God, and the fear. And that's when I start doing inventory. Fear of no control, fear of authority, fear of not being worthy. And I start mapping out what's going on in my thought life. So I can, and then I surrender to God and I go, God, what is your job description for me? And I meditate on the answers, and it shifts my thinking. I draw on divine thinking, higher conscious thinking, than that reptilian fight, flight, medulla oblongata thinking, which a lot of people do. And it's a go-to, and it's important, in a situation where you got to react immediately, you want to be able to draw on that reptilian brain. But in higher actualization and higher ways of dealing with the minutia of life, I need my thought life on a higher plane, on a God conscious plane. And that's how I deal with, when I have these feelings that I don't like. I think, what am I thinking? And what do I need to shift? And inventory is helpful. 4 and 5 is very helpful in discerning what that problem is.
Yeah, speaking about 4 and 5 here, next question's from Ryan, and I'm just going to get down to the question. What are the benefits of shorter or longer inventories? Whether it be as much detail as possible in that inventory, that step 4, or grouping people and situations together, for example. What are the benefits of either one of those?
You got to take everything case by case. There are certain defects in my life right now that I'm aware of that are problematic, and certain resentments that I still hold. I work at them, and sometimes they go away. Like I say, when I'm centered, even people I really vehemently dislike, when I'm centered, I have no animosity. I'm neutral. But I can get off that neutrality. I can get off course. And then the resentment kicks in and the animosity expands. And then defects will kick in. Like I'll slander or gossip their name to someone, knowing that they're going to go back to that person and tell them what I said. And I do it deliberately to do that. And all I do is harm. I harm the person I share it with. I harm the person that I'm speaking pejoratively about. And ultimately, I harm myself. And the other day I did it. I cracked off. And it was my ego taking over, and I got vicious about it. And I said some really nasty things, and thinking, the ego is very seductive. Yeah, I can say something that's going to shock this person. It's going to go back to that other person. It's going to hurt them. And I think, yeah, I've got power. I've got agency, but I pay the Christ, I've been thinking about it ever since. And it's dwelling in my brain, gnawing at me and making me restless and irritable and discontented, even though my ego convinced me that was the right thing to do. That's the value of 4 and 5. And so I take it case by case. Sometimes I can just brush it off. Sometimes I got to pause and pray. And sometimes I got to do inventory and then implement an 8 and 9. And that sucks because I got to eat humble pie and it tastes awful. But
yeah, man, we've got a ton more questions coming in. We aren't going to be able to get to them all in this time. So what I'm going to do, I'll ask you one or two more here, but all these questions that have come in, I will post them in our WhatsApp group as well as on our Facebook page. And anybody can chime in on their experience, strength, and hope. Cameron, if you'd like to join in, you're welcome to do that too. Here's the next question. This is from Nikki M. Thank you for my life and all you do. How do you, after almost 20 years in these rooms, keep your program fresh and interesting, especially in these crazy times when principles before personalities is a must?
That's a good question because my enthusiasm for the program is at an all-time high. I've never been more enthusiastic about my program than I have right now in my life. It continues to grow. I've been riding a pink cloud for 18 and a half years. I'll be celebrating 19 years this November 21st. Part of that is I got Nikki in my life. Nikki's my neighbor. Nikki is a wonderful person. She's a little insane, but she really is an amazing person. And what she's done with her program, that's a bright spot in my day, just knowing what she's done out there and her support with my program and her friendship. That's what makes it so much fun and exciting. And I can weather the vicissitudes, because I have people that I know are watching my back and I'm watching theirs, and that I ultimately I take responsibility for my program. I'm responsible for my illness and my recovery, and I work my program. I work it like a dope run. That's really one of the reasons why I experience what I experience. And I have a fellowship around me that I crave. Like the book says, go out and start a fellowship that you crave, right? As we trudge the road of happy destiny. And, that's how I'm able to do it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we'll wrap up our questions with, I'm going to combine two here from an anonymous attendee. Can you please describe your personal daily prayer, meditation / step 11 practice?
Yes, I have a number of different prayers that I use. There was a wonderful prayer on YouTube. It's called the Step 11 Meditation. It's an 18-minute prayer, and the woman who does it has a wonderful voice, and she literally, in a meditative voice, narrates all the spiritual prayers and passages in the big book in this 18-minute presentation. Well, I've parsed a number of segments of that meditation. I have a 3-minute step 3 meditation that I start my day with and often start a session with a prospect with. There's a 90-second step 7 prayer meditation that I use often to close a session with a prospect and close my day with. I use what's called a rainbow centering. In the 90s, when I was in the personal development business, we used the colors of the rainbow and to go deep down within our being, red being the physical, orange being the emotional, yellow, the mind, green is peace, blue is love, purple is aspiration, and violet is centered. And then, and I use that as a guided meditation to bring about a centered being. The thing about meditation is, remember, meditation is not an end in itself. Meditation is what I do when I'm off-centered. The goal is to be a centered man, to be a centered woman, to be centered with the divine. That way I'm able to proact throughout my day and execute God's will. So whenever I'm off track, it's usually my signal to pray, where I talk to the divine within me in a useful way, and then I meditate in whatever way. There's lots of different ways to meditate. There's all kinds of them on YouTube. Try out a variety of them. Find the one that you really resonate with and use that. The goal is to be a centered man, to be a centered woman, so we can proact and implement God's will in our daily affairs and access a power that lets us easily control that desire to drink, use, or act out. And I'm for that. How about you?
Absolutely. And if you have links to those meditations, if you can email me those, I can put those in the show note. If not, we'll just kind of reference them back to here. But anyways, before we close out, do you have any final words of wisdom for us, Cameron?
Well, I'll quote what my sponsor told me at the end of the session when he said, I send you out as sheep amongst the wolves. Be wary like a serpent, but gentle like a dove. And he said, lots of 4s and 5s, lots of 8s and 9s.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much, Cameron. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addictions and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your questions, and there's still several open questions here, I'll be posting those in our WhatsApp group. I put the link in the chat here. I'll put it in the show notes of the podcast. Come join in, look at those questions, answer them for others, and just create this community with us. If you have not yet rated or reviewed the podcast in Apple Podcasts, please go do so now. It's a great way to work your Step 12. And I invite the audience to come back next week when we will be hearing from Pete B., sober in NA since 1980. His topic will be sponsorship, and he has been sponsoring for a long time and has some great experience, strength, and hope to share with us on that. I really look forward to hearing from him next week and getting to know him. I hope you come back next week. Now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the we version of the Serenity Prayer. Cameron, if you wouldn't mind saying that and getting us out of here.
So just to wrap up, a great American sponsor, Mark Houston, he used to tell a quick story where a guy went duck hunting with his friend, and he took his dog with him, and they shoot a duck, and it drops in the middle of the pond, and the dog gets up, walks on the water, and picks up the duck and brings it back, and his buddy doesn't say anything. So he shoots another duck, drops in the middle of the pond, the dog gets up, walks across the water, and brings the duck back, and still he doesn't say anything. So he turns to his friend, and he says, do you see anything wrong with my dog? And he goes, yeah, that dog can't swim. Missing the miracle of a dog walking on water. This is what I love about our fellowship in our rooms. We walk into the rooms, we meet people just like ourselves who've gone down the rabbit hole, down into that depth of despair and destruction, and yet they don't do it anymore. How is that possible? Because they've discovered a power greater than themselves, a power that does for them which they can't do for themselves. And people like Justin and Nikki and some of you others that are self-admitted addicts who don't drink, use, or act out anymore, that's the dog walking on water. We bear witness of this power, and I love the we version of the step of the Serenity Prayer, because it signifies what God does for us that we can't do on our own, but as a fellowship plugged into the divine reality, miracles abound. So on that note, the we version of the Serenity Prayer: God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. What can't we change? Anything outside ourselves. What can we change? What's inside ourselves. And the wisdom to know that difference. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Cameron. Keep coming back, everybody. Come trudge this happy road with me. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching